Hello and welcome to Hard Copy, the program where we bring you the people behind the news. I'm Maokbe Ogun. In 2004, 5 years after Nigeria's return to democracy, President Olusegun Obasanjo set up the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NEITI, becoming one of the first countries in the world to sign up to the Global Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. Now, Nigeria's NEITI was highly applauded by many Nigerians as well as the international community because many saw it as a vehicle which would help reverse what is now perceived in resource-rich countries as a resource curse. It's now 13 years and 7 audit reports since the institution, which comprises both government and civil society, was set up. What progress has the institution made? Are Nigerians the better for it? Tonight, I speak with Waziri Adio, who was appointed Executive Secretary of NEITI just about a year ago, on the journey so far. Just stay with us. Waziri Adio, you're welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you.
Now, you were appointed in February last year, I think February 16, if I'm not wrong. You've been there for, it's close to a year now. Coming from the perspective of a journalist, how would you say work has been in NEITI?
It's been quite interesting. Don't also forget the fact that I used to be there. I was Director of Communications at NEITI between 2007 and 2008. So it was a form of, homecoming for me. I'd stepped out. I left 2008, as I said, so I came back 8 years later. Many things have changed, but certain things, also remain the same. So it was going back to a familiar terrain, but it's also not so different from the media, the work that we do. If you remember, the media, have a responsibility to hold the government to account on behalf of the people. That's precisely what we do in NEITI, to ask government how is taking care of the resources that is holding in trust on behalf of the people.
When you say many things had changed, you mean were they for good or for bad?
Mostly for good. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you leave a place, you've left a place for 8 years, it will be wrong for you to assume that it's the same organization. The EITI concept itself has evolved over time. The country has also changed in different ways. So because of that, you have to look at, if you go with the mindset that you had 8 years earlier, definitely you are setting up yourself for something else. So yes, I knew a bit about this place, but I also had to listen to the people who had been there longer than myself and also consult with different stakeholders and see how do we want to push the work forward.
Let's talk about the work itself. I mean, you just said that one of the things that EITI was set up to do, and especially NEITI now, is to hold the government accountable. How much transparency would you say that NEITI has been able to bring into the extractive industries in Nigeria?
I would say a lot. NEITI, as you know, came into existence in 2004. So if you take that as a snapshot, 2004, what we know about the oil and gas sector in 2004, and you compare that to what we know now, is definitely a world of difference. As of 2004, that sector was completely opaque, and it was a sector that if you were not an insider, if you didn't have a degree in geology, you had not worked in the sector, you would not know what was going on. Nobody was disclosing anything. It was until NEITI did the first audit report that we begin to know that, okay, this is what's going on in the sector. So we have moved a lot from where we used to be, but there's still a lot more to be done. We can ask so many questions. There's a lot more transparency, a lot more cooperation from the companies and from the government agencies now than we used to have. But we can also ask ourselves, transparency for what? Accountability for what? Then we can also even raise some other questions. There's an assumption behind the EITI as a whole that if you manage resources in a more transparent way, that will lead to more accountability, and that will lead to more, better governance and more prosperity, for the citizens. the assumptions are not, they should be interrogated. The assumptions, the linkages might not be automatic. And also, if we ask ourselves, the reason why we came into being was to ensure that the country manages its natural resources in a more effective way, in a way that would translate to prosperity for people. The question we can ask ourselves now is, after implementing this for 14, 15 years, has that translated to more prosperity for Nigeria?
And those are key questions. But before we get to, asking that particular question, there are those who say that, there were the days of reforms, especially when NATI was formed, I think 2004, but the act was passed in 2007. People say that there were the days of the reformation, as it were, that zeal to get the oil sector, the extractive industries reformed, even though a lot of the focus was on the oil and gas sector. Now, they said that some of the zeal died shortly, maybe in 2007, thereabout. By 2009, that zeal was not there as much as it used to be. Would you say, would you, prove those kinds of people, the people who say that, correct?
On one hand, I think they are right, but if we look at the bigger picture, I don't think they are totally correct. One thing we need to bear in mind is that the zeal that the initiator will have might be different from that of those who take over from that person. The person that brought CITI to Nigeria was President Olusegun Obasanjo, and remember that he used to be in Transparency International, and he also brought somebody who used to be in Transparency International with him, Mrs. Obi Ezekwesili, who also drove, the EITI thing in Nigeria for some time. So when they left, NATI went through some transition period, and new set of people came in. They need to fully understand what was going on, and possibly the government of the day might also have a different agenda. But having said that, we also need to bear in mind that the work continued to go on. Up to now, from 2004 to now, NATI has published a series of audits, 7 of them in the oil and gas sector. And over time, NATI also went into the solid mineral sector because we felt that that's a sector that's very important that the country should also explore, and also make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes that we made in the oil and gas sector. So we've done 5 solid minerals audit reports. We've also done a report called the Fiscal Allocation and Statutory Disbursement Audit, which focuses on how the money is spent.
How much influence would you say that government wield in NATI?
A lot, but it also depends on the people who are driving it. A lot in the sense that everything rises and falls on political will. If you do your reports and you make tons of recommendations, and the government doesn't have the appetite, to push through, or doesn't have the will, to push through, then you're just doing your audit reports. But a lot also depends on the people who are driving the organization at each point in time, the board, and the management, to see how they can fully understand the environment and how to make sure that the organization continues to be relevant and continues to set the pace in terms of reforms in the larger sector.
So would you say that's the link between transparency and good governance, political will? Because it's one thing for the audit reports to come out, as you rightly said. It's another thing for government to be able to implement, or be willing to implement, the reforms that are needed to bring about good governance. I mean, the actions that people really want to see.
Yes, political will is very critical, but I will look at it from 2 sides, both the supply side and the demand side. Because in most instances, we focus on the government. The government should do this. It would be nice if they do that. Because this is very important. This is a sector that accounts for bulk of our resources, bulk of our public revenue, and funds our budget from there, and our export and all of that. But what if the government is not interested in transparency? What if the government is not really interested in reforms? So what happens? So where's the pressure to make sure that the government, does what it should do? That's why we need the legislature. That's why we need the media. That's why we need the people. So we should focus on both sides, both the supply side. The people should supply, good governance, or should supply the political will that will move things forward. But also the demand side. How do we get the people and the different institutions of government and countervailing measures to put pressure on the government to do what it should do? So the political will is not a given. It's not something that any government owes anybody. It would be nice if they do it, but it would be nicer if people demand it. Basic principle of economics says nobody will continue to supply what is not demanded.
But isn't that why NATI has a robust body? Because you say that the people must demand it. And if you look at the representation on NATI's board, you see journalists being represented, every zone of the country is represented, certain critical civil society organizations are also represented on the board. Isn't it because they want to create that awareness? Is that achieving the purpose at all?
Well, that's the starting point. Having that multi-stakeholder group where different constituencies that are critical to this endeavor are fully represented. That is the starting point. It cannot be the end point. What we should be asking ourselves is this. We have existed since 2004. That's 13 years now, right? We should be asking ourselves, despite all that we have achieved, right? We're the ones leading the reform now. We're the ones, putting issues on the agenda. But despite all of that, how much do the people know about this sector? And with what they know, are they asking the right questions? So until, it's very important that we look at how do we measure success. We can measure success by saying, we have done this report, check. Our report has been presented to the National Assembly, check. Our reports are driving this, check. But we can also look at it. Are we looking at just that or at impact? If the impact that we should be measuring is how our effort has led to a reversal of resource costs, how it has translated to more prosperity for people, then in as much as we should congratulate ourselves for what we have done, we should know that our job is not done until Nigerians across the board benefit from the resources that God has given them. So it will continue to be a work in progress. It's not work that can finish. It's not like something that you do in 5 years and you end it. And, yes, we can continue to publish all the reports and maybe all those things, all those findings are implemented. But the end goal, which we shouldn't lose sight of, is that Nigerians should benefit from their resources. And for that to happen, other things also need to happen. It's not what NATI can do by itself. Our own is to provide the information. Our own is to empower people. Our own is to engage the public, the policymakers. But the policymakers also have to do the right thing. So there are so many, and the media, will have to weigh in. Civil society has to weigh in. The legislators have to weigh in. And the government too has to say, okay, we have this information. So what do we do for the benefit of our people?